Hi, everyone, and welcome to Be True, my podcast about the writing I love and the writing I do. I promise I won't rhyme the whole time. I'm John Tessitore, and today, Blue and Brown, from my chapbook, The Americans. You can find all of my work, including The Americans, at johntessitore.com. It's time, folks. That's the message of today's podcast. It's time. People of good faith have to stop asking, can it get any worse? It can. It has. And it will, if we don't get off our asses and take some control of the situation. What we have witnessed over the past 2 decades, since the September 11 attacks, I would argue, is not simply the resurrection of fascist impulses in the West. What we have witnessed is a brazen, blatant consolidation of power. Corporate and moneyed and authoritarian power throughout the West, and especially in the United States. The problem is not your aggrieved, ignorant uncle or your red hat wearing neighbor. Those guys are just a particular symptom of a larger problem. Hell, we're all symptoms. The problem is, and has been all along, corporate and authoritarian power running amok, infiltrating every part of American society, from the White House and Congress and Supreme Court, to the faceless behemoths who pay our salaries and pollute our planet, to the big media conglomerates who have taken over social media, which was, at one time, our hope for a global democratization. Centralization, disenfranchisement, monopoly, power over people, profit over human survival, a Machiavellian might makes right plunder by the very rich, abetted by the aggrieved, the resentful, the ignorant, and the fearful. All of this leaves a substantial majority of Americans, like me and you, feeling confused, disenfranchised, and utterly helpless. This is a poem about helplessness. His time is cheap. His time is not cheap. The cost of his time is a dream. An ounce of blood for under 20, the price of a half ounce of silver. He tries to keep the market in mind. He doesn't know who's paying, ultimately. Suspects that dollars can be traced all the way back to ExxonMobil. Somehow, as everything always is. Up into the atmosphere, down to the groundwater, he is involved in this enormity somehow. This he suspects, rather, he knows. He is a shrinking ice floe. His time is cheap. Eye floaters, carpal tunnel, hemorrhoid, sciatica. His grandfather lost a finger in the paper mill, or were they stitching the rivets onto blue jeans and it was severed in an industrial-strength sewing machine? He never remembers which accident left his grandfather with a stump. Their time was cheap. Most work is a mystery. Some small act implicated, complicit, hidden even from himself, but worthy of blame nevertheless. He is no longer young, but he is still driven by old men, mostly men, the ones who didn't rally or live lives of protest. Those are the ones who hold the reins. How did we fail to come to this conclusion? How did we fail to predict the end? Their time. He writes their memos, attends their meetings, translates their decisions. All day, there's a music in his head. Meta, 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 an engine with a sputter. We are children, and our time is cheap. So much fear about decisions when so few matter. His father would choose B or A and work his ass off until it paid, and always the locomotive rhythm. Meta, 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 meta. Air escaping a tire. Maybe a land developer. He's nearing the end and may never know for whom he's racing. The promise of a first-class education. The economics of overpopulation. The quiet fade of a forgotten generation. How did we fail to come to this conclusion? His time is cheap. Petrol, plastics, pesticides, poison. He remembers hoping he'd be Don DeLillo or Joe Strummer or Abby Hoffman. His time is not cheap. An ounce of blood for under 20, the price of a half ounce of silver. But there is nowhere else to turn. Meta, 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 meta. The cost of his time is a dream. He gets up to go home. Everyone else is gone. He puts on his jacket, leaves his computer on. What is our time worth? That is perhaps the fundamental question of human existence. Our time is limited. What do we do with it? What is it used for? Who gets to use it? Who gets to use our time? The title of this poem, Blue and Brown, is taken from a lyric in Clampdown, a great Joe Strummer song from The Clash's masterpiece album, London Calling. You grow up and you calm down and you're working for the Clampdown. You start wearing blue and brown and you're working for the Clampdown. The blue and brown of worker uniforms, the blue and brown of fascist uniforms as well. Either way, cogs in the machine. Willing cogs, either because we don't realize we're cogs until it's too late, or because we can't figure out any other way to survive. I know I sound like Abby Hoffman in 1968, like a wild radical. So be it. The question remains, and it's not a radical question, who controls your time? Or better yet, to whom do you give your time? That way of framing the question, to whom do you give your time, changes things a little. It gives us some agency, maybe some hope, and allows us to describe the way things should be, rather than the way they are. By asking to whom we give our time, rather than who takes it, we find our principles. And they're not complicated either. I record this episode on Independence Day, and I propose 3 principles for your consideration. We give our time to a government that is a functioning democracy of one person, one vote. We give our time to an economic system that limits the exploitation of the poor by the wealthy at home and abroad. And we give our time to a lifestyle that prioritizes human and environmental concerns over the concerns of corporate boards. Entrenched power has opposed these principles throughout human history, and has done so with shameless vigor in the last 2 decades. As a result, fascism is on the rise at home and abroad, along with economic inequality, atmospheric temperatures, and sea levels. We cannot afford to ignore what we know any longer, nor can we afford to sulk in our helplessness. We need to be the friction in the machine now, by speaking out, as I'm trying to do here, and by voting and marching and annoying leadership at every level, and frustrating big business, and being mindful consumers, and starving the beast as completely as we can, by controlling how we use our time to the best of our ability, by exercising our humanity professionally, artistically, spiritually, sexually, privately, and publicly, by insisting on our rights as humans to be ourselves, each of us unique and each of us exactly the same under law, and by remembering that we were wrong. The institutions are not going to fix themselves. We need to fix them. And so, in the hope that you use your time wisely and give it away wisely, in a way that rewards the enormous effort of living, this is John Tessitore concluding another installment of Be True. If you've listened this long, thank you. You can find all of my work at johntessitore.com. But first, London Calling. Play it fucking loud. Special thanks to me for today's theme music, which I call C Chord. Maybe we'll talk again, and if you enjoyed this little podcast, leave some stars or a review, and tell your friends. In the meantime, I gotta feed the dog. All right, Luna, I'm coming.